The former Minister for Southern Response, Megan Woods, says while it's too early to call for a criminal investigation into the state insurer, the issue of the double DRA and hidden costs has been known for years. A High Court ruling last week found that Southern Response's behaviour was deceptive and misleading when it hid a higher costing from the Dodds family when the state insurer settled their claim. A similar case in the Supreme Court in mid-2015 over a house owned by Avonside Holdings found that Southern Response left out the cost of demolition, contingencies and professional fees in the settlement. Megan Woods told Checkpoint today that she had received correspondence from hundreds of dissatisfied customers of both Southern Response and EQC as Minister, some relating to DRAs. Logan Church asked Megan Woods who knew about the two-quote system.
Well, I've asked officials about that. Southern Response certainly knew that there was a live question. They would have been receiving correspondence around it as well. I'm assuming they told the Minister, the previous Minister.
Because the Minister earlier this week said that the first he heard of it was last Friday. Is that plausible?
Well, look, I'm not sure. And they're questions that you have to put to the previous Minister. I can't say what he asked his officials and what he was told.
So, are you able to, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but off the top of your heads, how many claimants have come to you directly over this issue, over the double DRA?
Oh, look, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I've received hundreds and hundreds of letters over the 2 years that I was less than 2 years that I was Minister for both Southern Response and EQC, and I couldn't tell you how many were around the specific issue. But what we did do, that everybody who sent me a letter, that we took it seriously, and we made sure that that information was channelled back into the agency because, of course, as Minister, people often thought that I had the ability to settle their claim, and of course I don't. In fact, exactly the opposite. But I did always give an undertaking to people that I'd make sure that their concerns were heard by either Southern Response or EQC, so all that correspondence was sent through.
So on that, how many meetings did you or your office facilitate between customers and the Chief Executive of Southern Response? We obviously heard from one couple yesterday who met with the Chief Executive, Anthony Honeybone. How many similar meetings were facilitated?
Oh look, a number of the letters that I received, we would forward through, or my office, or usually my office would forward through, and ask Southern Response to take a serious look at it. That people had taken the time to write to a Minister and raise concerns. So what I'd do is I'd ask Southern Response to have a look at this case and to try and a resolution for those claimants.
So you mentioned that you've had hundreds of letters come through regarding both Southern Response and EQC. Do you think Southern Response has treated its customers fairly?
Oh, look, I think that certainly a number of concerns have been raised with me. And I raised concerns when I was an opposition MP as well. But one of the things that when I became Minister, I made it really clear how I expected claimants to be treated. The other thing that we did, of course, was set up the Greater Christchurch Claims Resolution Service. So there were other ways for people to have their claims settled. And now, of course, we've got the tribunal up and running. So that there's yet another pathway for people to get their claims settled if they're not satisfied with the direct contact they're having with their insurer, whoever that may be. So it's something I took really seriously in my time as Minister, of making sure that we could find ways in which people could be treated fairly to get resolution of their claims.
So just to be clear, you didn't think that Southern Response was treating its customers fairly and something needed to change?
Oh, look, I think in terms of the sweeping statement of fairly, there were instances where I thought that people certainly didn't feel like they were being heard. That was something that I would ask Southern Response to take a look at, where people took the time to write to me. I think that's what they deserved, that they were asking someone to listen to them, and that was my job. And certainly I always asked both the EQC and Southern Response to listen to the concerns that claimants were voicing.
It's quite interesting because the High Court ruling last Friday took that a little bit further in the Dodds case when they said that Southern Response had been deceptive and misleading. What was your reaction to that announcement from the High Court, that ruling?
I think that it is a shame that the clarity wasn't brought at the time of the Avonside decision around exactly what would happen with those claims that were settled before that this is another one of those issues that has just been allowed to go on far too long. And it's certainly why we have taken steps since we've come into government to make sure that we can find ways to get people to get back on with their lives. I don't think the previous government did enough to find clarity. I don't think the previous government did enough to make sure that we had the end in sight, and that's something that we have been determined to do. I am disappointed to read that decision in terms of the way the people were treated, and that is not something that we made clear that we would want people to be treated in that way.
How far do you think that misleading and deceptive behaviour goes within Southern Response?
In terms of misleading and deceptive behaviour, I would like to think that we've caught it all. The Avonside decision did draw a line in the sand. It is now a question of what the properties that were settled before that in terms of those DRAs. We've got a court ruling. There is now a decision to be made by Southern Response about whether or not they appeal that decision. But in terms of making sure that people get treated fairly, that has been an absolute priority for me in the time that I was the minister, and the reason why the Greater Christchurch Resolution Service was set up, so people did have an alternative place to go in order to get independent advice, to get free legal help, to get access to engineering support, all the things that were needed to get their claims settled. So my concern of making sure that people were treated fairly has always been at the forefront of my mind.
Does Southern Response owe its customers an apology?
Look, I think we need to work through the issue. Certainly, we've already had an apology from Southern Response in terms of the use of Thompson and Clark, which is
that's very different though to this issue.
What I'm saying is that we've already had a number of occasions where Southern Response has apologised to its customers. Look, I don't think that the way that Southern Response has behaved throughout its history has been up to standard. I've never resiled from that point. In fact, it was me that referred the behaviour around the use of Thompson and Clark through to the State Services Commissioner, because there were questions there when I read documents that just didn't sit right with me. That I think that we need to make sure that we are treating people fairly, but I also think some of that leadership needed to come from the from the politicians that were involved as well. I've made it really clear how I expect claimants to be treated in the time that I was minister, and I have absolute confidence that Minister Robertson will do that now that he is minister. I don't think that we had that leadership under the previous government.
What thought should be given to a criminal investigation into Southern Response?
Oh, look, it's too early to say that, and that is something that the minister who is responsible for Southern Response would need to answer.
What do you mean it's too early to say that?
Well, there's still decisions being made around whether or not to appeal the decision, but that is a question that you need to put to the minister who is the minister responsible for Southern Response.
I've previously asked you about a public inquiry into Southern Response. Since then, obviously more has come to light. Do you think there needs to be some sort of inquiry into Southern Response? And would you support such inquiry?
Well, the key thing for the minister who will be responsible for handling the inquiry on the Earthquake Commission when it comes back, who of course will be Minister Robertson now, is that we have actually asked Dame Sylvia Cartwright in the course of the EQC inquiry to look at the interplay with other insurers as well. That's not a question I think we should answer till we get back the piece of work that Dame Sylvia is working on. I've heard nothing but positive reports from within the community about the way in which she's engaged with people and about the fact that she is that she's really getting into the issues that were there with EQC, and by definition that will include the interplay with private insurers, because a number of those properties that went over cap obviously involved the other insurers as well. So I don't think that we can answer that question till we see Dame Sylvia's work.
And that's former EQC Minister Megan Woods. Southern Response says it will not be commenting during the 20-day appeal period. The current EQC Minister, Grant Robertson, declined to be interviewed. But earlier this week, Jerry Brownlee, who was EQC Minister from 2011 to 2017, said that he first heard of the double DRA system when the Dodds ruling was released last Friday. So Logan Church went back to Mr Brownlee today to ask him if he stood by his comments.
Well, I think if Megan Woods is saying that she knew about this in opposition, I'm very surprised that she didn't make some sort of advocacy approach to me as the Minister. I was not looking at the day-to-day activities of Southern Response. We were looking at the overall picture. Remember that we were engaged in numerous areas of recovery throughout that time. and we were very much relying on the letter of intent and expectation of that, and we're getting reports that most definitely were showing that progress is being made. Bearing in mind that this was a run-out insurer, and that effectively the value of the insurance policies that any of the AMI Christchurch customers had was effectively extremely minimised as a result of the neglect from the AMI board, and we just wanted them to be dealt with as fairly as possible, given that the taxpayer was paying.
I see. So in your position as Minister, you sort of trusted Southern Response to just do its job.
That's the way most state-owned enterprises tend to operate. And whenever there was controversy, I was obviously asking questions, but details about how they went about assessments and ultimately either settlement proposals or rebuilds was not something I did. I'll tell you what I did do, though. I never advised anybody to take a cash settlement. I frequently advised people to go down the full repair or rebuild option if it was in front of them.
The Avonside Holdings case came out while you were Minister responsible for Southern Response, and that case sort of pertains over a similar issue as the Dodds, which was Southern Response withholding information pertaining to the actual cost of repairs. Were you aware of that ruling?
Well, as I've said, we would have expected Southern Response to respond to the requirements that, or put in place requirements that reflected the essence of that ruling. Look, can I also say that it's very, very easy for someone like Megan Woods to look backwards and say how clever she was to know what was going on at the time. Remember that, in total, there was 170,000 houses damaged in Christchurch. Many of those were over cap and therefore part of the Southern Response issue. Southern Response, in fact, had just under 40%, I think, of all the houses in Christchurch. So they were a very big player, no question about that.
So just to clarify, Mr. Brownlee, so you were aware of the Avonside Holdings case ruling, is that right?
I would have. I don't have an immediate I don't have an immediate recollection of everything that was in that case. I know that the Southern Response were being taken to court by some of the significant litigators around at that time. I would have been getting reports about the progress of litigation and ultimately about the decisions that came down from the court. Our expectation as shareholding ministers would have been that where the courts had declared something, that they should alter the operational practices to reflect those sorts of declarations.
So just to confirm, Mr. Brown, was any work done at a ministerial level as to what the implications of that particular ruling would be? Because it's a very similar sort of case to the Dodds' case in many ways.
Just back the bus up a little bit. All we were constantly getting was revised increased costs coming through. We didn't balk at any of those. We recognised that was what was likely to happen, given the time that was being taken and the way in which the changes like building codes and everything else were having an effect on the outcome. So I have to be quite blunt with you. I was not engaged in the day-to-day operations of Southern Response and would not have been familiar with the individual cases, given the vast numbers of them. I think it's very easy to tear down Southern Response. Remember that had the government not stepped in, all of the claimants to AMI would have been in considerable trouble. If the government had left it to a normal commercial solution, then all of the policyholders for AMI would have been liable for that end cost.
Southern Response says it won't be commenting to us while the window to appeal the Dodds' judgment is still open.